17 nations came together on the 10th of January 1920 to form the League of Nations. Later, that League of Nations would become the United Nations. 6th of December 1921, after 500 years of British rule, 26 counties in Ireland voted to become independent, but 6 counties voted to stay with Britain in what is called the Anglo-Irish Treaty. On the 30th of May 1922, the Lincoln Memorial was unveiled in Washington, D.C. It is a huge building like a Greek temple, and it has a 6-meter high statue of Abraham Lincoln sitting on a chair. On the 30th of October 1922, Benito Mussolini demanded to take over Italy or he would attack with his 800,000 black shirts. On the 4th of November 1922, Pharaoh Tutankhamen's tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in Luxor, Egypt. He had ruled from 1334 to 1325 BC. In 1924, the Olympics were held in Paris, France. Now you might know about this because there is a very famous film about 2 athletes who competed in these Olympics. One of them was called Eric Liddell, and the other one was called Harold Abrahams. And there's a very famous film about this called Chariots of Fire. Now I like this because it's a great film, and I also like it because it's got great music by one of my favourite composers called Vangelis. On the 26th of January 1926, a Scotsman produced the first black and white television pictures. He later went on to help produce colour pictures. On the 20th of May 1927, Charles Lindbergh took off in a plane from New York. On the next day, 21st of May, he arrived in Paris. His flight had taken 33.5 hours. He was awarded a prize of $25,000 US. On the 24th of October 1929 was what is now known as Black Thursday. This is where lots of share prices plummeted and what is known as the Wall Street crash. Some people who had lost a lot of money in this crash committed suicide. The 14th of February is normally known as a very romantic day, but in 1929 it wasn't so romantic because 7 people were shot dead in Chicago by the mafia. It's known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. In New York, in 1931, there was a kind of a competition to see who could put up the tallest buildings. The Chrysler Building went up and it was 280 meters or 925 feet high. But 1 year later, in 1931, the Empire State Building went up, which was 100 meters higher, 380 meters, which was 1,250 feet. In 1930, there was the first football or soccer World Cup, and it was won by Uruguay, who beat Argentina 4-2. On the 5th of February 1931, a British man called Malcolm Campbell, who later went on to be called Sir Malcolm Campbell, became the fastest man on Earth after reaching 395 kilometers per hour or 246 in his car called the Bluebird. He did this at the Daytona Beach in Florida. 1932 was the start of the Great Depression in the United States. In 1932, the world's longest single-arch bridge was opened in Sydney, Australia. It's 1,140 meters long. On the 30th of January 1933, Hitler came to power in Germany. On the 23rd of May 1934, in Gibsland, Louisiana, the famous couple Bonnie and Clyde were shot dead by the police. They had murdered 9 police officers and 4 civilians. In 1935, there were tensions between Italy and Abyssinia, now Ethiopia. Italy left the League of Nations as the League of Nations imposed sanctions on Italy. On the 15th of May 1935, the Russian underground opened with 13 stations. On the 20th of January 1936, King George V died. On his death, his son Edward became king and became Edward VIII. However, he didn't reign long as he abdicated on the 11th of December 1936. Because he had married a divorced woman called Wallis Simpson. This became a very famous case and even a film called Edward and Mrs. Simpson. On the 17th of July 1936, the Spanish Civil War started. It ended on the 1st of April 1939. Decades later, on the 31st of October 1978, all Spanish political parties got together to form the Spanish Constitution. There was an end to hostilities and there was a kind of peace in Spain. American Jesse Owens won 4 Olympic gold medals in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. On the 26th of October 1936, the world's largest dam, known as the Boulder Dam, which was connected to the world's largest man-made lake, started generating electricity. This Boulder Dam is now known as the famous Hoover Dam. On the 11th of December 1936, King Edward VIII abdicated so he could marry Mrs. Simpson. His younger brother George became king and was known as George VI. George VI was a very good king for Britain, and he helped Winston Churchill during the war. He married someone called Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, and she later became known as the Queen Mother. They had two girls called Elizabeth and Margaret, and Elizabeth went on to become Queen Elizabeth. George started to reign as George VI on the 12th of May 1937. George VI unfortunately had a speech impediment, and a very famous film called The King's Speech was made about this. On the 6th of May 1937, the 245 metre, 804 feet long German Zeppelin called the Hindenburg burst into flames as it was about to land in Lakehurst Naval Station, New Jersey. It had been filled with hydrogen instead of helium because of the restrictions of the Nazis. It reached a maximum velocity of 135 kilometers per hour or 84 miles per hour. On the 7th of July 1937, Japan invaded China on what is known as the Second Sino-Japanese War. This was really the start of the Second World War in Asia, but not in Europe. In July 1937, Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan disappeared on a round-the-world flight. On the 13th of December 1937, the Japanese entered the Chinese city of Nanjing, or Nanking. It's called Nanjing or Nanking. Here, unfortunately, there's some terrible events happened. They committed atrocious war crimes which went on for about 6 weeks. Not going to really go into those war crimes, but they were terrible. Lots of women and girls were raped, their families were murdered, and it really is a terrible thing. However, decades later, on the 15th of August 1995, the Japanese Prime Minister officially apologized for what had happened. Another atrocity happened from 1936 to 1938, as between 700,000 and 1.2 million people were killed in what is known as the Great Purge. This was in the Soviet Union. This is crimes against the state. On the 14th of March 1938, Hitler completely ignored the Treaty of Versailles and helped form the union between Germany and Austria. He got permission from a very weak British Prime Minister called Neville Chamberlain to take over German parts of Czechoslovakia. Neville Chamberlain thought that if he allowed the Germans to do this, this would just stop there. But unfortunately it didn't. It led on to the Second World War. The 7th of November 1938 saw a terrible event called the Night of the Broken Glass against the Jewish population. The Germans destroyed the shops of many Jewish people and forced many of them to leave Germany, and also forced many of them into concentration camps. The Germans told the Jews to pay for it, and also told the Jews to give them their money so they could leave Germany. On the 15th of March 1939, Germany took over parts of Czechoslovakia after Britain signed the so-called Peace Treaty. 1st of April 1939 saw the end of the Spanish Civil War. On the 7th of April 1939, Italy invaded Albania. Then on the 1st of September, Europe plunged definitely into war. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and Poland tried to defend themselves with the cavalry, but it was impossible. Tanks against horses was impossible. On the 3rd of September 1939, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain told Germany that he would declare war on them if they didn't withdraw from Poland. But Germany didn't just want Poland, it wanted the whole of Europe up to the Ural Mountains in Russia. So Britain declared war on Germany, and France also declared war on Germany. Also on that day, someone called Winston Churchill was appointed to the British cabinet. On the 15th of December 1939, a very famous film called Gone with the Wind was premiered. Do you remember that the British Prime Minister was Neville Chamberlain? Well, he was diagnosed with cancer. He really wanted to end his days in peaceful Europe and didn't want the war. So he did little to deter Nazi Germany. He longed to sign a peace treaty with them. But things were heating up in Britain. And on the 10th of May 1940, it was agreed someone called Winston Churchill should take over as Prime Minister. This was agreed between all the parties in the British Parliament. In the Conservative Party, where he was power, and in the Labour Party, which was the opposite party. This was one of the conditions that Clement Attlee, the leader of the Labour Party, wanted. Things really took a turn after Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. Britain now had a coalition government, which means that all the United Kingdom parties were in government together. There were no opposition parties.